all, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for each one of you taking time out on your Saturday morning to come out to learn more about Plan Bay area. My name is Pat Eklund, and I am Mayor Pro Tem with the City of Novato, and I serve as the ABAG Executive Board representative for the 11 cities in Marin County. 2 years ago, Plan Bay Area was adopted by the Association of Bay Area Governments and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. Shortly thereafter, the Marin ABAG delegates identified what went well with Plan Bay Area 2013 and what improvements we felt were critical for Plan Bay Area update, which is due in July of 2017. Copies of that document, along with our principles, are available on the handout table, and so hopefully all of you pick those up. We shared this document along with our principles to both the Association of Bay Area Governments and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. And since then, I, along with many others, have been actively advocating for changes to the process and the content for this update in 2017, frankly, with some mixed success. I'm not going to go through all the areas for change, but there's a few that I just want to highlight. First and foremost, we believe that ABAG and MTC need to really engage the community, and for that matter, also the elected officials in Marin, in a more collaborative process early on that fully explains the issues and allows us adequate time for meaningful involvement of the public, elected officials, and our staff. That did not happen in 2015, in our opinion. Another issue that surfaced 2 years ago was that ABAG's projections for population, housing, and jobs differed from the Department of Finance, which was incredibly frustrating for many of us. This time around, we've called for ABAG and MTC to provide the rationale and the modeling used to project the population, housing, and jobs, and to compare them with Department of Finance and other agencies, Census Bureaus, and others. And before they're finalized for the update, we should give an adequate time to evaluate those projections to ensure that they coincide with our local general plans. Marin County loudly and clearly called for ABAG and MTC to include sea level rise, water availability in the update, since it was not adequately addressed 2 years ago. Today, we're in our fourth year of a drought, one of the most severe droughts on record in the state of California. Lastly, we believe that the update really needs to emphasize that each county and city town has its own character and our own needs, and that the recommendations made in the plan are just that. Recommendations that are at the discretion of the local jurisdiction, since we are responsible for planning and zoning. We've made some progress on the lessons learned. We're having this workshop today. This is not an opportunity for us to try to sell plans. That is not what we're doing today. But we're attempting to engage the Marin community in a dialogue about the update of Plan Bay Area and provide you an opportunity to ask your questions of ABAG and MTC and provide feedback on some of the fundamental aspects of this plan. Today, we're beginning the dialogue on the two key components of Plan Bay Area update. First, we're examining the population, jobs, housing forecasts in Plan Bay Area 2013. And Cynthia, one of our speakers, will be talking about some of the ways that they're looking at it for the update. And we're asking them our questions. Are they accurate, or do they need to be modified for the 2017 update? Secondly, today we're looking at the goals and the performance targets for Plan Bay Area 2013. Are they realistic? Should they be modified for the 2017 Plan Bay Area update? Lastly, what are your priorities for those performance targets and goals? and you're going to have an opportunity later to express those opinions. Again, I want to thank you all so much for coming today to the first public workshop. And I did want to take just a minute to introduce the elected officials that are in the room and will be here as long as I can, and hopefully you'll have a chance to have some open, honest dialogue with them at the end of the workshop. First, and in no particular order, Linda Pfeiffer from Sausalito, you can stand up. Stephanie Moulton-Peters, and hold your applause, please. Kevin Harrop from Larkspur, please stand up. Ray Vithi from Sausalito. Elizabeth Breckus from the town of Ross. Doug Kelly from the town of San Anselmo. Mary Beth Bushy from the wonderful town city of Centerville. And then David Connolly, our supervisor from our county. Please give them all a round of applause. Thank you. And with that, now I would like to introduce Brad Paul, who is the Deputy Director for the Association of Bay Area Governments. And he became Deputy Director in March of 2013, and he's in charge of communications and works closely with the Planning and Research Department at ABAG and all the governance agencies or committees that ABAG has. Brad has come to ABAG with an extensive background in community planning, development, affordable housing, and philanthropy. And he's worked with public, nonprofit, and private sectors. And I think one of the things that sort of sticks out in his background is that he served as the San Francisco's Deputy Mayor of Housing for Mayor Art Agnos from 1988 to 1992, which is a long time to work in that capacity. So please join me in welcoming Brad Paul.
Thank you, Pat. Can people hear me? I just wanted to say a couple things. Besides all the nice things that Pat said about me, I also live in Marin. I live in Greenbrier. But I can relate to people's concerns about housing because I rent right now, and I've been trying with my wife to buy a house for the last 9 or 10 months, and it's not easy. We keep getting outbid every time we go someplace by $150,000, $200,000, $250,000, and people are offering all cash, 15-day close, no contingencies. So as both a renter and trying to be a homeowner, I have a real sense of how difficult things are here in the county. But I also wanted to say that we at ABAG are very grateful for the work Pat and the ABAG delegates in Marin have done, because as she started to tell you, before the vote on Plan Bay Area 2013, she started convening the delegates. And ABAG is governed by a General Assembly, which is one elected official from every one of the cities and towns that's a member in the Bay Area, and one from every county. And normally they get together at our General Assembly for a business meeting, where they meet for half an hour and vote on our budget and work plan and the minutes from the previous year. But in the last couple of years, after Pat started doing this, we thought, this is actually great. We got invited to these, and we heard from people from every city and town in Marin. And we said, why don't we do this all throughout the Bay Area? So based on that, right after we passed the plan, we started convening with our executive board members countywide delegate meetings in San Mateo, in Santa Clara, in Alameda, in Contra Costa, around the Bay Area. And we heard a lot. A lot of it was unhappiness with the process from the last Plan Bay Area. And a lot of it was people asking us to help them in dealing with some of the issues they were dealing with, helping them find more resources, helping them deal with state agencies who were making them do things that didn't make any sense. And I don't think she's here today, but Jessica Jackson, who's on the Mill Valley City Council, went to our, not the last GA, which is last April, it was one before that, and called me the next day and said, you know, I thought you wanted my involvement. I came to the meeting, and the conference was good, the panels were good, but the actual delegate meeting was us getting to vote up or down on a budget. What kind of a conversation is that? So we sat down and said, she's right. And so the last one we had in April, we spent half the meeting in 3 caucuses of our delegates and participants. We had big cities and connecting corridors, smaller cities and towns, and larger suburban communities. And I sat in on the one for small cities and towns, which Julie Pierce, our president, who's from the city of Clayton, I think has about 10,000 people. She was there. There was a member of our executive board and several senior staff members at each one of these. And we listened and talked for 2 hours, hour and a half, with people from 35 or 36 cities and towns, smaller cities and towns, to hear what they want us to do. And so that's really why we're here today, is to listen. We're not here to sell you anything or convince you of anything, because as Pat said, Land Bay Area at its heart is about maintaining local control. And it's about what each city wants to do. I believe personally, that the way you solve the problems in Corte Madera and Mill Valley and Novato is a lot different than the way you solve a problem in San Mateo or Redwood City or in Walnut Creek or Concord and Contra Costa County. And we need to respect that, and we need to help all of you, little communities, do the things you want to do to create the kind of complete community you want. So I don't want to take too much time. I'm supposed to talk about the milestones, and I'm going to show you this handout. I hope you all have one. There's also a board out in the hall, actually it's on this paper right here, that talks about this. We have about 2 years to go in this next process, and it's divided into 5 areas on the sheet. And I'll just briefly explain to you what they are. There's the policy element, which has already started, and that's what we'll all be talking about a little bit later, and that has to do with looking at the goals and performance targets from last time around to see if they actually still make sense, and if they relate to the things you're dealing with in your communities, and if you want to add or change things on there. And if you look at this, every time you see a red box or a blue box, that is where we will have a hearing at either ABAG or MTC, or our 2 executive boards meet jointly. It's called the Joint MTC Planning Committee, ABAG Admin Committee meetings. At each one of those 3 types of meetings, the joint meetings, the MTC Commission meetings, and the ABAG Executive Board meetings, there will be a chance for people to get up and speak and provide their input. But the idea of this meeting and other meetings we're having is we need to go out into the community to talk to people where they are and ask the same questions that we're asking on these boards out here and in the plan. And so the public policy piece, the policy element, will go on from now through September of this year, where we will jointly adopt the policy or performance targets and goals. Then the regional forecast, which Cynthia will be talking about in much more detail in a few minutes, is starting about now, looking at what is the methodology that is going to be used, and looking at a preliminary forecast, and that will come out around July. The final forecast won't be adopted until next January, so there's plenty of time to understand how this is done, and have input into it if you're an individual or a city or town, before those numbers are arrived at. The next piece is the transportation revenue forecast, which MTC is doing, and the next section down there is the project performance, which is MTC's piece of this. They really focus on the transportation side. ABAG focuses on the land use and housing side. So there'll be a call for projects that comes out very soon. We have somebody here from TAM. Derek, when does it come out?
The call for
Projects, is it out?
It is already out. It was out as of April 29th, and we'll be submitting our guidance for local jurisdictions later this month.
Okay, and then the final, then that closes in September on our chart. So those things under project performance are basically handled by MTC and the county transportation management agencies. And finally, there's the scenario analysis, which will start working on that in July of this year. There'll be a release of 3 defined scenarios in November of this year. There'll be a number of hearings and public workshops, and the final preferred adopted scenario will be in June of 2016. And then we start in October of 2016, in June of 2016, preparing a draft plan, final plan at EIR. There'll again be a number of hearings at MTC, at ABAG, and jointly. And the final plan will be up for adoption in June of 2017. So that's the rough timeline. But within each of those sections, there will be a number of opportunities for people to contact us, to appear at public meetings, for city councils to weigh in on each of these elements, the policy discussions, the regional forecasts. And I look forward to Cynthia's presentation, because I would have a very hard time explaining clearly how forecasts are done. I've heard her do it several times. She's always been good at it. She's getting better. So with that, I'm going to turn the microphone back to Pat.
Thank you very much. Now is the time for your comments and questions on what you've heard. We do have a roving mic here that it would be great if you could speak into. Maybe I can ask Doug to, thank you very much, Doug Kelly. And so Questions?
Yeah, you're talking about solving problems, and one of the things that come in, particularly you having spent most of your time in San Francisco. San Francisco's population, I think, has increased 150,000 people in the last 20 years. And this goes back to an article in San Francisco Magazine when they a picture on it called the skyscrapering of San Francisco, building these big towers and stuff. And so what I find is if you look at that picture, it kind of tells everything. San Francisco is solving its problem, which is a lack of green space that allows for kind of human contact with the world we live in our backyard. The National Park Service is increasingly becoming a dominant feature in the life of Southern Marin, where I live. And particularly the use of the bridges on the weekend. And this increase in population is directly related to the increase in congestion in our rural roads and all of our communities, which are increasingly being flattened by it.
So,
and yet, what I'm making this as my assertion. My question is, what I'm seeing is a lack of any funding, any direct funding to address this on the level not of buses, but on the level of our roads, which are impacted by this, and any kind of really updating of the traffic and circulation elements. Now, what can be done in this plan, which seems to be overburdened with the idea of housing, which we really can't impact on us anymore. What is being done to address circulation?
Okay, thank you very much. Brad, do you want to take a shot at that?
So, first of all, I share your concerns. I have friends who live up at the top of the ridge going down to Muir Woods, and they just had to fight off a plan to build a huge parking lot up there. So I understand the problem, and I also know how bad traffic gets for people who live in Tam Junction when people are trying to get to Stinson Beach on that road. So I understand the problem. I can't offer you a solution, and I don't know if there's going to be another workshop on the 28th. MTC will be there, and they have a series of boards, which I didn't bring with me, that talk about all the transportation projects that are in the pipeline right now. And one of the things they're going to be doing is accepting proposals for additional funding and additional projects that need to be funded. So I would urge you all to go to that with specific ideas about what would help. I also know that you're right, San Francisco in the last 4 years has created 75,000 jobs in one place. And they've created about 5,000 units of housing to house those people. So that economic engine, while it has its upside in generating revenue for the city, has generated a huge increase in population that the region is not prepared to handle. How much longer that boom will go on, no one knows, but that's one of the driving parts of the problem. I think the key thing is for communities, not just in Marin, but Sonoma, Napa, Contra Costa, to look at ways that they can create the kind of community they want and address those problems and go to the people that fund those programs and say, this is a specific thing that we can do for this much money to provide some relief. I know we were talking before the meeting about a very different kind of problem in Sausalito with bicycles, but I used to live in Sausalito and I know what that was like. And if you imagine not as many bikes as there now, but 2 or 3 times as many, it would cripple the city of Sausalito. So these problems are everywhere. I think what we need to do is, and if there's anything we can do at ABAG on the planning and housing side to help you figure that out, or help you look at ways to fund those kinds of things, we're happy to do it on the housing and land use side. But MTC and TAM are looking at these things right now. They actually have a call for projects out, so now is the exact time to make a proposal that with $500,000 or $1 million, you could create a way to solve part of the problem of congestion in any part of the room.
What is that meeting going
The 28th meeting?
to be?
There's actually flyers, there's little flyers at the end of that table right there.
Marin County Civic Center cafeteria.
Okay.
Unfortunately, MTC was going to come, but it was not, is not here today. But ABAG and MTC will be at the Civic Center from 5 to 7 in the cafeteria, the 2nd floor, for an open house. And that's another opportunity to ask some of those hard questions that you have. Thank you very much. Question in the back?
Yes, I have sort of a general question about the role of the ABAG. For those of us who maybe are not so familiar with it, could somebody explain exactly what you are. It sounds like it's an advisory group, but maybe an advisory group with some teeth, or, you know, is there funding from ABAG back to local jurisdictions? I would just like to know sort of, you know, on whose authority or what authority, you know, do you work from, and how the interrelationship between the cities and ABAG.
Great, thank you. I'll start it and then I'll turn it over to Brad to get into more of the details. First, the Association of Bay Area Governments and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission are both regional agencies for the San Francisco Bay Area, the 9-county San Francisco Bay Area. The Association of Bay Area Governments is actually a council of governments, and it was formed many decades ago. And it actually has every city and every county, most cities, I would say with the exception of one, and all 9 counties are members of ABAG. And that's why we have a General Assembly every year where there's an actual vote on whether or not we approve their work plan and their budget for the upcoming year. And Brad has lots of examples of where what ABAG has done. I know they've helped us fund the Bay Trail here in Novato, and if you're not familiar with it, highly recommend that you go out to Hamilton. That Bay Trail is outstanding along the recently established wetlands out there. They provide money for our green business program that we initiated decades ago. They've provided money for the San Francisco Bay program, and actually a lot of environmental efforts. And Brad, do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the specifics, the energy and so on?
Sure. And I think the questioner asked sort of what's where the authority comes from, what the origin of it is. And I find it really interesting that in the late 1950s, there was a proposal by the Bay Area Council, I believe, to create a single regional agency, like the Port of New York and New Jersey. And it had gotten into the state Senate. I think they had actually passed the bill. And it would have created a new state agency that would have run the Port of Oakland, the Port of San Francisco, and the Port of San Jose, San Francisco Airport, Oakland Airport, San Jose Airport, and all the bus lines in the 9 Bay Area counties. And several mayors got word of this late in the process. And the mayor of Berkeley actually called a meeting and got together 57 mayors and said, we can't let this happen. And they formed an organization to fight that state bill. And they were arguing about a name, and they wanted to call it the Metropolitan, what were they going to call it? The Metropolitan Council or something like that. And the smaller cities in town said, no, that's too big city. So they came up with the name Association of Bay Area Governments to both fight that bill, but to protect the interests of the 101 cities and 9 counties of the Bay Area. That's why they were created. We are known most for, these days, Plan Bay Area and RENA. RENA we got a role in many years ago when the state gave out a number for the region and then wanted the Council of Governments in each area to then figure out how to divide that up. And we can talk about that later, but we play a role in that, but we also encourage counties, if they want to take us out of the process. So for instance, in San Mateo County, we don't do that. We give the county a number, and they have an association of all the cities in San Mateo, and they decide among themselves, between the cities and the county, how to divide the number up. And that works so well, they came up with ways of sharing RENA credits, of doing projects that 2 cities participated in and share the credits. It's totally up to the cities and counties, or cities, towns, and county Marin if they would ever want to do that, but that's another way to do it. And finally, the one thing that Pat was talking about is BayRent, where we make available millions of dollars of rebates to homeowners and owners of multifamily homes in the Bay Area to install energy-saving devices. If you go on our website, look for BayRent. But we try to find ways to fund work that cities and counties are doing on earthquake preparation, resilience, and more recently looking at issues of sea level rise and water supply.
We have alphabet soup in all government agencies. RENA is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. That's required by state law, and he said that we get the numbers of housing units that we need to do in the Bay Area, and they're responsible for divvying up. I sat on 2 of those RENA allocations. Now they're an 8-year process. But I failed to introduce Hing Wong, who is the Marin County representative over here from the Association of Area Governments, and you'll be learning more about Cynthia Kroll, who's one of our featured speakers. We have a gentleman there, and then the young lady on the end over here had her hand up.
I think the previous question answered some of my questions, but I'd still just like to ask, Corte Madera got out of ABAG. What are the consequences if we just decide that they're asking more of us than we want to give, or, you know, what are the consequences of Novato leaving ABAG?
Corte Madera did leave the membership of the Association of Bay Area Governments, but that does not affect their allocation or the assignment of numbers for housing or jurisdiction or anything. What it does do, in my opinion, is it does not give them a strong voice. I am a very strong voice for Marin County, as you can imagine, and also for Novato. I think Brad and Cynthia and Hank can attest to that. And I will continue to represent Corte Madera, but in my opinion, it's best if they become a whole member again. That's my personal opinion. Does that answer? Brad, do you want to talk about? Okay. Are they eligible for grants, even if they're not a member? Okay, so they're also eligible for grants even though they're not a member, which we need to double check on that. Yes, I'm sorry.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here and providing this opportunity. I'll say my question first and my comment. My question is, what is the purpose of this meeting? My understanding had been that it was to receive public comment at this stage of development of Plan Bay Area, and that based on previous experience that there was going to be renewed and reinvigorated and reimagined effort to engage the community. And I am concerned that there are so few of us here, so I'm also wondering how was outreach done, and how can we do this better? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The purpose really is what I stated, is for an opportunity for public to ask questions and to be able to comment on the two fundamental aspects of Plan Bay Area that's going through public comment right now, which is on the goals and performance targets and also the population, jobs, and housing. It's unfortunate that MTC is not here. Originally, they had agreed to come, but there's another opportunity for people to also get additional information on the 28th in the open house that they're going to be having at the cafeteria. How it was publicized is that the agenda was distributed to all the cities in the county. And folks were asked to distribute that to their interested parties. And then 3 of us wrote an op-ed piece which appeared in the Marin IJ. And I also asked the Marin Scope papers to cover the story, and I do not know whether or not that was actually printed, even though I asked. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Wendy.
I have talking.
And then the gentleman in the back.
I have the talking stick, yes. This is a question / comment to the elected representatives who are in the room. There is a lot of talk about local control and wanting local control. I would like to hear more talk about local responsibility. I'm glad, I think, Pat, you said the word local responsibility in your talk, and I was really glad to hear that, because it's both. We do want to be able to shape our communities in a way that is appropriate, but at the same time, there are multiple crises going on right now. In the Bay Area in California, we have an economic boom, which is driving up prices, which you are experiencing. I have some friends who are really important members of community who just had their rent raised by $1,000. And people are being driven out of our communities. Our communities are changing radically and rapidly. It's a huge concern. And I don't see a lot of the cities really stepping up to address it. Certainly the housing elements which are required are being passed, but these are essentially reports to the state of what's already on the books. I want to congratulate the city of Novato, who has been the first to pass a junior second unit ordinance. I look forward to those being passed around the county. I think they will. But that still only addresses a very small population. And there's a lot we need to do, and we need to get creative about it. We cannot just keep saying no to everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. I think you'll have an opportunity at the end of the workshop and at the break to also talk directly to the elected officials who are in the room. But just to talk, I think all of the elected officials that are here and are in Marin County, I believe, understand that there is a local responsibility for us to our communities. And, you know, I personally have experienced several families that I know and have lived in Novato all their lives, had their rent increased, and they had to move out to Greenville.
Yeah.
And that's the only affordable place that they could find, given that was a family. So there's no question that there is a crisis in the 9-county Bay Area, and actually in the Tri-Valley as well, about rental costs and housing, basically. And I think all of us are doing what we can within the parameters of the constraints. And I think the thing that I mentioned at one of the first ABAG General Assemblies is that don't we have the carrying capacity in the San Francisco Bay Area? I mean, if you look at water. In fact, I was watching the news last night about people talking about the 1,500 housing development out in the East Bay, San Ramon, I think it was. And a lot of the community was saying, wait a minute, we're supposed to be cutting back on water. We don't have enough water for the people that are here. You know, how are we going to be able to accommodate additional ones? So I think that there are some struggles, and that's what the locally elected officials, that's, I guess, why we get paid the high bucks, is for us to be able to try to resolve those.
Right. Zero.
Can I add one thing to that?
Oh, I'm sorry, Doug?
San Antonio just passed the junior second unit as well, but one of the other things we have, which is a problem, is that ABAG doesn't currently, and Brad's working on this, he recognizes the insanity of this, doesn't recognize second units or pardon me, units if they're for, say, for assisted living. And maybe there's a complex somebody wants to build where you'd have 25 or 12 or 18 units for people in assisted living, but it only has one kitchen, okay? That's not recognized as housing.
So I think it's actually the state of California, HCD, and Brad, did you want to talk a little bit about what ABAG is doing to have some of those other units count?
And you're right, the state actually has, they don't count assisted living at all as a unit because it doesn't have a full kitchen and bathroom. But think about it, I read not too long ago that 40% of the single family homes in Marin have one person living in them. And why? Because they don't want to leave the community. If they could move nearby to an assisted living facility where they can go to the same restaurants, the same stores, the same movie houses, and be able to walk around, see their friends, see their family, they do it. So building assisted living frees up single family homes for families. Now, in today's market, they're not going to be that affordable, but at different times during the cycles, they could be. But the state doesn't even count that. And they don't count when you buy an existing building. Let's say there's a building in downtown Novato or downtown San Rafael that's an apartment building that houses people who work in the city. And it's reasonable rents, it's market rate. In this market, it's not going to last. You're right, rents are going to go $1,000, $1,500. So if the city allows somebody to buy that and make that permanently affordable to arrange it in advance, you get, well, you technically get credit for it, for about 25% of your arena number, but the paperwork you have to go through is so difficult that nobody's ever done it or can't do it. So we need to fix those things. But I think the bigger issue is if in people's minds the choice is doing nothing or building a wind cup or the millworks over here, we're never going to make any progress because nobody wants those projects. But there are things that we have a lot of consensus on, which are smaller infill, some large family projects, but not quite that big, that fit into their communities better, and junior second units, and assisted living, and acquisition rehab. And we need to come up with a list of what are the things that people in each of our communities agree on, and get the resources to do those, instead of fighting another wind cup, which I don't think is going to happen in a long time. But
Could you just touch on what does qualify?
What does qualify?
so mostly they're looking for new units. So if you build a new unit, for what?
For a second, what does it take?
Oh, for a second, I'm sorry, you're talking about qualifying for arena credit. Second units, actually, I'm gonna let Pat answer that because she has one of the best ordinances around. Pat, can you explain what a second unit is and what qualifies for a second unit?
Basically, a second unit is where you have a single-family home and then you have a separate building, like 700 square feet is what we have in Novato, but every community is different. That's actually a living unit with a kitchen and a bathroom. That's considered a second unit. A junior unit is something that is new to the whole state of California, and compliment the City of Novato staff for coming up with this concept. And that is where you have an extra bedroom in your house, and if you want to like rent it out, as long as it has a dedicated bathroom, it will count towards achieving your RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, for the state of California. Now, if you have a bedroom in a house that does not have a dedicated bathroom, that will not count. So, but there are some creative ways for people to be able to meet their RHNA allocation. So Stephanie wanted to say something, and then I think Linda, and then we'll go back to questions.
Great, thank you. Something very brief. I hail from the town of Mill Valley City Council, and I was recently at a meeting on Highway 37 improvements. It was a 4-county meeting with Napa, Solano, Sonoma, and Marin County. And the thing I learned that I found fascinating is that, and it amplifies on some of the points that are made, our residents are being priced out of Marin County, Sonoma County residents are being priced out of Sonoma County, Napa County residents are being priced out of Napa, and they're grateful that Solano is more affordable. So there really is this whole domino trickle-down thing going on, and I just wanted to say it really is a Bay Area-wide problem. So when we hear about Pat's longtime residents moving to Guerneville, somebody in Guerneville was displaced, and they've had to go somewhere else, and that's how big this problem is. So I just wanted to get us to think a little broadly, more broadly. And then the other brief comment is, I love the infill idea. This is certainly something Mill Valley is providing, and we need help with financing for that. And there's a role that ABAG can play working with financial institutions to provide loans for infill housing. It's currently not very easy to get those. Thank you.
And that is one of the things that ABAG does do, and Brad can talk about that a little bit later. And just that Linda Pfeiffer, and before she does, I just wanted to also say that I met recently with the supervisor in San Francisco. I'm not going to mention names, but he's being priced out of San Francisco. And so it is a 9-county Bay Area problem. And there's a good side. Our economic engine is working really well, and on the downside is that property is just becoming very valuable and very costly. Linda?
Thank you, Pat. So I'm Linda Pfeiffer with the Sausalito City Council, and I want to thank Pat for organizing this. I want to thank the people who are videotaping this, because I think, irrespective of the turnout today, the fact that we'll have this video up and running will increase the outreach to the public. And I want to say it's a shame MTC is not a part of the panel up here. I think it reinforces a kind of a silo mentality, a bit of a fractured approach to land versus transportation planning. I had a couple questions, and they're different. And the first question, I think a lot of people, I'm part of the, obviously I favor a low density, minimal impact approach. And with respect to our limited resources here with water, et cetera. And I'm looking at the time frame for projections. I think a lot of people are interested in terms of when the projections will come out for housing, and I'm looking at this and also the job growth projections. So I just wanted to confirm, my first question is, I see a methodology hearing in July. I wanted to confirm that they're going to be making that decision in July. And I see another performance target, and I guess a hearing in September. And I wanted to confirm those 2 dates so that the cities will be receiving their performance targets in September for review, and then I guess that will not be solidified until first question. I have another one, but I'll wait for you to answer that one first.
Thank you very much. The good part of Plan Bay Area Update 2017 is that we do not have to deal with the housing allocation at all. The regional housing needs allocation was actually approved in 2012 for this 8-year cycle that started in 2014 to 2022. So the allocations for housing that each of the cities got is not going to change. What we are going to be examining, and Brad and Cynthia probably in her presentation will talk a little bit more about it, but the methodology that is on the milestones is really looking at do we need any shifts in the population? Do we need any shifts in the job projections that were made collectively for the 9-county Bay Area? And I think Cynthia is going to have some really good information for everyone about Marin County. Marin County is a little bit different than the other 8 counties. And I think that's important for people to realize. So does that answer your question?
Yes, but the time frame for that, was it July for the methodology and September for the performance targets? That's what I'm seeing in the...
Cynthia, you confirm?
Yeah, that's in the calendar. Yeah, if that's what you're seeing in the calendar, that's right. But you mentioned the performance targets for the cities. My understanding is the performance targets are regional-wide targets, and we're not going to give targets to each city.
Right. And she'll have more information. I did want to mention that I give ABAG reports at the mayors and council members. Those are now getting posted on the mayors and council members' website. So and that's available for all members of the public. So we had a gentleman who's been patient, and we have 2 more minutes left of the public comment portion of it. Gentleman, very patient back there. I thank you very much. And then we do have another question up here. And then after this question, we'll close this public comment period, but you'll have plenty more opportunities to raise questions.
Thank you very much. My concern is equity. In particular, Clayton, when you asked about the bad roads in Tan Valley was vociferously against being part of the PDA, which would have allocated more funds for road projects in that area. 2 weeks ago, Monday, Mill Valley had a really good discussion about traffic and growth, and they found that there was a huge gap between the number of people moving in and the population of Mill Valley and the number of trips that were experienced, and that traffic was going crazy. Believe it or not, the answer is not because of some sort of outside force, but because as we grow rapidly in the income of our homes and the value of our homes, people who have more money generate a lot more trips. Nails, tutoring, public services. So my hope is, and let me state that I don't think Windcup is the sort of housing we need. Across the street, San Clemente is a gorgeous example of the house we need, of subsidized housing. And for those of us who feel subsidized housing is inappropriate, let's look at Prop 13 and how much subsidies each of us receives in reduced property taxes because of that. And let's also look at the largest federal housing program, which is the interest mortgage tax deduction. We all are subsidized housing. The people who are at the lowest end of the economic spectrum are the ones most affected by this cascade that we talked about San Francisco, Alameda, Sonoma, Napa, and then Solana. And what that does is it increases regional congestion. So we have a regional responsibility to build housing for our workers, our lowest income workers, our people with disabilities here in Marin, and not export poverty along with traffic the way that we've been doing for generations. So it's time to turn that around and to hold ABAG accountable for the sort of equity considerations and the generation of traffic comes from not taking care of our own local needs.
Thank you very much for your comment. Last question.
Well, I'm hoping you'll address that.
Bradley, you want to address that?
I'd actually be happy to continue the conversation with you after the break, but that's a big piece of what we need to do. And my concern is that when we build 50 units of affordable housing under the federal fair housing law, we have to do a lottery. And the people who are in most need of that housing sometimes don't have a chance, because as you read in the papers, when there's a lottery, thousands of people show up.
Yes, but 80% of people who live in affordable housing in Marin work in Marin.
But I'm not arguing against building more affordable housing. I think in addition to building affordable housing, we have to look for opportunities to buy the housing these people already live in. So as the other speakers said, they don't have $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 rent increase, which forces them out of the county. I just think we need to do both. That's all I'm saying.
Our last question, because we're over time. Pam Jordan from Novato.
I don't have
microphone.
I don't have any particular platform or speech here except to thank Hing Wong. Hing Wong is the one bureaucrat that in 2010 came through with a good explanation of the numbers for Novato and helped Novato become the city of yes. Now, advocates have called us the city of no, but in fact, we have built more affordable housing here than any other city in the county. We continue to have a very pro-affordable housing policy, and we require 20% inclusive affordable housing for every new project. We're the people who are actually getting it done. Now, everybody out there who's not an advocate probably knows this, and even the advocates probably knows this. But Hing Wong is the one who got the ball rolling about giving us our numbers, enabling us to grapple with them, and getting a better RHNA the next time. I am so thankful that we are actually being heard because of this meeting. And I actually think the comments that the people made will have some effect this time, unlike the entire 3 years from 2010 through 2013, where I was an ABAG groupie. Now, I don't want to ever be that again.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Elizabeth Breckus, who is the mayor of the town of Ross. She grew up in Ross, and she's an attorney. And she's going to be introducing our next speaker. So please join me in welcoming Elizabeth.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and this is my first year of serving as a Marin ABAG delegate, and I've been very happy to work with other members of the county, cities and towns, and the county in drafting a list of principles. And one of those principles, which you should have a flyer on, talks about population forecast. And the principle that we came up with is that we want to encourage use of realistic and credible population, housing, and job projections that clearly articulate assumptions, modeling, and rationale. And it's kind of a wordy way of saying that we want population projections to make sense and be realistic. And this is a great discussion, and I'm not at all upset to see the number of people that are out here. People are busy, but the Marin, your Marin representatives are on this ABAG body because we are here to advocate for residents, whether they're home in their beds right now or whether they are here. So it's great to have this opportunity to listen to people's different viewpoints, and it's a difficult discussion. We do need to preserve diverse housing stock in Marin County. That's very, very important. And it's very important to encourage affordable housing. And yet it's also important to remember that we do want to preserve Marin County and promote Marin County as it exists, and so that we can be proud of this county going forward and be looked at as stewards of growth and development. So I'm here to introduce Dr. Cynthia Knoll. She is a chief economist of ABAG. She oversees and supervises a team of research analysts, and she has a very impressive background and education in economics and planning. And the projection is that population in Marin County will increase, and we're here to hear from her. So thank you very much.
So good morning. Thank you very much for coming here and for giving me the opportunity to be part of this engagement with the community. I find that when I come to these events, I always have some takeaways that help to influence the work that we do. So you really are listened to and help to create what we will come up with. What I want to talk about today is what the regional forecast is, why we do it, what aspects of Marin are particularly important in then determining how we figure out how the county might grow. Here, yes, I don't have control over my slides. That's a new experience. In fact, I thought for a while here that I wasn't going to have them at all. So what is the regional forecast? I think that you mentioned that you want a realistic forecast, and that indeed is the task that is what we've been tasked with. That at the regional level, we are trying to come up with population, employment, and housing numbers out to 2040 that are realistic in terms of the kind of growth we're seeing at the national level, at the international level, and how the Bay Area interacts with those global macro conditions. So at the regional level, that's what we do, and it's primarily based on, and on demographic factors as well that are already well entrenched in our local area and in the nation. That's what we do at the regional level. At the local level, we then have to distribute that forecast geographically throughout the region. So you can imagine that's trickier. We have methods of looking at the market forces that would pull growth to one area rather than another, but we also are very concerned with looking at the policies that local jurisdictions have that restrict or encourage growth to go to their area. So all that is taken into account when we do our projections. Another thing I want to mention is that although this projection will go to 2040, I want to remind you that projections 2013 also went to 2040. So why are we doing it 4 years later? And in fact, we had an assistant at our Looking Ahead board at one of our earlier public workshops who was from the PR firm rather than from our shop, and I overheard him explain to people, well, the last one went to 2016 and the next one will start at 2017. And I said, no, that's not how it works. You know, there's so much uncertainty looking forward out to 25 years from now that we have to relook at this frequently. And in fact, just in the last 3 years, we've gotten something like 40% of the job growth that's predicted out to 2040. Does that mean we should raise our job projection or not? Well, that's one of the things we're considering right now. So why do we have this forecast? Why don't we just use the Department of Finance numbers for one? We had this forecast where we considered the Department of Finance numbers as part of what we're working on, but it's not the only thing we do because we need something that's internally consistent. In fact, the Department of Finance comes to us and says, well, what do you think the employment forecast will be? Because that influences what their population forecast becomes. And the mismatch that Pat mentioned earlier between ABAG and DOF numbers happened when that communication didn't happen. So we try and do a whole set of forecasts on population, housing, and jobs internally, so what we get is consistent. We also do this forecast so that local jurisdictions, many of them can't do their own forecast anyway, although San Francisco and San Jose might, but most of them don't. This gives them some numbers to think about for their own part, but also an understanding of what will happen in the areas around them. financing, often a local jurisdiction will go and ask for a grant, and they have to tell the funding agency what they expect in terms of growth. And then we're also required to do it by California statutory framework. So we aren't imposing these numbers on any place. We're trying to understand what's likely to happen. There was some mention of concern that we still have silos, ABAG and MTC. I want to assure you that this part of the process anyway is very much a group process, and there's a lot of communication as we go along. ABAG is responsible for the region-wide forecast numbers, but there are two people from MTC who sit as ex officio members on our technical advisory committee, and one of them I meet with every 2 weeks. Then when we get to the geographic distribution, the actual modeling is being done by MTC staff, and the information for that modeling and some participation in the shape of that model is coming from ABAG and from the local jurisdictions. So if any of you are with local jurisdictions, I'm really here to urge you to, when we come out and say, please review these numbers for your area. Please tell us if you have any additional information on recent building or pipeline. Get it back to us so that we can come up with start our forecasting on the best information that's available. And then all of that information will go to MTC, which will do the travel demand and the greenhouse gas forecast. So I wanted to, I'm probably running through my time really quickly, but I wanted to say a little bit about how good these forecasts are. And so I've gone back and looked at previous forecasts and compared it to what actually happened. And I've done that for the Bay Area, but for you today I've brought Marin County. So you can see that previous forecasts did pretty well in following a trend, but they didn't catch the slowdown in population growth that started in around 2000 in Marin. That I think has something to do with one of my later slides on how old the population is here. The most recent forecast has recognized that slowdown. Has it recognized it enough? We'll be thinking about that as we evaluate the population forecast for Marin going forward. But at some point, those houses are likely to be occupied by larger families than they are now, and so it may well continue the county may well continue to add population, even if it doesn't add a lot of houses. On employment, it's been much harder to forecast population for Marin, and forecast jobs for Marin, and you can see that again. I mean, that's true for the region as a whole. That employment is much more volatile than population, but overall, region-wide, the agency has tended to forecast more jobs than we've gotten if you average it out over a longer period. The most recent projections, 2013 forecast, however, was much more modest in terms of expected growth than a number of the earlier ones, and I think has more of a recognition that when we have boom periods like we're having today, they're not likely to be long-term sustained booms, not in a region this size, not with an economy that's based on innovation where you have many different product cycles that happen that affect the number of jobs you have. So I've already given you a couple of the reasons why forecasts are less accurate. Another reason they're less accurate for a place like Marin is that, A, we don't have particularly good data on Marin. It's only this year that they're starting to report Marin employment through the Bureau of Labor Statistics, separate from San Francisco and San Mateo. And so when you look backwards, ABAG had to really estimate that from census data. And then in addition, it's really hard to project where the next hotspot will be. So where will growth be drawn? And we had for many, many years growth really focusing just in Silicon Valley, San Francisco losing jobs, and then we've had a couple of periods when San Francisco has been the center and the hotspot of job growth. It's not as likely to happen in Marin because of all the restrictions on building. You certainly have a labor force that is part of that innovative sector. So I wanted to go on and talk a little bit about what makes Marin, what distinguishes Marin, makes it different from or unique in the Bay Area. So it is one of the counties where much of the employment is jobs that serve the local population, as opposed to what you're seeing happening in San Francisco or in Silicon Valley now. It's an older population, and you'll see just how much older in a minute. It's also less ethnically diverse, wealthier. It's been growing more slowly, and I think because of the price problems, if people actually have to move in Marin County, they are more likely to move out of the county than in many of the other counties. Even the other smaller counties have less of this churning in that way. So just a few slides to illustrate those points. Okay. We're out of time. So in terms of jobs, Marin has less in terms of information sector, less in terms of professional business services. These are the kinds of jobs that are driving the boom right now, and more in things like health, education, and leisure and hospitality, and government. So that's a sense of what kinds of jobs you're likely to get growing in the future as well. Age. This was we put this slide together for our State of the Region report, and this was a really striking difference for Marin County than the rest of the region. That several years older in terms of median age. I think Brad already mentioned the number of living in single-family homes who may be moving out of those homes over the next 25 years. And this really is likely to shape what the future of the region is, absent any investment in housing or roads. And so it's really important, I think, for the jurisdictions to continue that conversation on how do you address, even if you don't, what kinds of physical changes might be needed to address these changes that are inevitable in this population going forward. Marin also has a much less diverse population than many other parts of the Bay Area, and again, this probably relates to the fact that it hasn't grown as much. And so it hasn't been an area that has been able to welcome much of our immigrant population, and so forth. Anyway, so Marin has, I think, 72%, we say here, who are white, non-Hispanic. So it hasn't changed nearly as much as the rest of the region. The region as a whole no longer has a majority population. About 44% of the region's population is non-Hispanic white. Marin had the highest median household income in 2013. Hasn't quite hit that in every year, just because of what's happened in the strongest dot-com boom years. But it's also notable as it's one of the few counties that has a median income when you adjust for inflation that's higher than it was in 1990. I think more than half of the counties have median incomes that are less than it was in 1990. So it's a prosperous and fortunate county. And Marin and Sonoma are the two counties that have had the slowest population growth in the region. And while population growth has started to resurge in many parts of the Bay Area, that's happened in Marin as well, but at a much slower pace. And as I mentioned, people who live in Marin who then move homes are more likely to actually move out of the county than we see overall happening in the Bay Area. So how do all of these factors affect the forecast? In terms of the age of the population, you're going to have a lower fertility rate and a higher mortality rate, and that's going to decrease the amount of natural increase that you have here. Although one confounding factor of that is to what extent will seniors living in their homes now pass their homes on to their children, or their grandchildren, depending on how old they are, who may then move in and bring a whole family with them. So that's part of the migration story that isn't necessarily part of the economic migration story. We have to figure out how to include that in our understanding of Marin once we do our distribution of all of the people and jobs to different parts of the region. In terms of employment change, not only do we have to look at what kinds of jobs and what people are here now in terms of demand for services, but we also have to consider who the labor force is here, because that then affects the kinds of jobs that grow here. And that labor force too may be changing as people retire. And then in terms of household change, I've really already mentioned that there will be changes in household structure over the next 25 years, but we just don't know exactly what that will look like. And we can be pretty sure that it will look a bit different here than in the region as a whole in terms of what share of that regional growth Marin gets. So I wanted to add just a few slides here on existing characteristics of Marin County as well as on what projections 2013 showed. And part of it is just to give you the overall picture of what's happening in the county, although sometimes economists like me are accused of borrowing your watch to tell you what time it is. You may already know these things, but maybe seeing it all up there together will give you a new perspective on it. And then also, in your comments, I'm sure some of you will be expressing concerns about what was forecast last time, and it's good for us to know that as we go ahead with the forecast this time to make sure that we're considering all the angles there. So, Marin's biggest population centers have been Novato and San Rafael, but also a large number of people living in unincorporated places in the county, more than in any one city. In terms of previous population growth from 2010 to 2014, it was fairly evenly spread. It was much slower than the Bay Area, and growth in the unincorporated areas was particularly slow. So let's go on to the next slide. So the next slide looks at, again, those numbers, but in comparison to what's actually forecast for 2040. So in terms of 2040 forecasts, again, the growth is fairly, sorry, I'm just trying to, the growth for most places is not that different than it's been over the last 4 years. But the big difference is in the balance of county areas. So that's the unincorporated areas where more growth was forecast. Now, in projections 2013, which reflected the Plan Bay area plans, there was a priority development area in the unincorporated area that's no longer there. So this may be one of the growth aspects that gets adjusted in our forecast. But we don't know yet. We have to look at what other reasons there were for that growth. And then overall, if you look at what's expected to be added on to cities, other than that, the greatest increase in actual number of people will be in the larger incorporated cities of San Rafael and Novato, at least in our previous projections. With even in other places where the percent change looks high, it's quite a small number of people. We go on. And then in terms of jobs, fairly evenly spread throughout the region, with Fairfax getting the largest percent change in jobs, but again, very small cities, so you don't have to get a lot of new jobs for that to produce large growth, and most of the new jobs going to San Rafael and Novato. Move on. And I just wanted to show you how overall Marin's projected employment and population growth in Plan Bay area. I just want to make sure those were the projections and not the most recent past, are quite a bit slower than the rest of the region, quite a bit slower even in the other smaller surrounding counties. So that's a summary of what we'll be doing and what we've projected in the past, not what we're projecting right now because that's not out yet. This is the process going forward, and if you have the handout, there was one mistake in that, which is that by winter and early spring of 2016, you'll have the final regional forecast, and there will be a interim preliminary regional forecast out sometime this summer. But the geographic distribution will be late fall or early 2016. So I am happy to take questions.
Hi, thank you for that great presentation. I just have the simple question on the 2013 projected employment of that second to the last slide, and asking why is the Fairfax employment figure projected to grow so much more than the others?
I think because it is a really small, it had very few jobs to begin with, and it must be projected to add a certain number of local serving jobs. And that probably came from the general plan of the city. But I should add, I've only been at ABAG for less than 2 years, so I was not intimately involved in how each of these projections happen. But we will be going back and revisiting this the next time around.
Yes, when you're preparing the forecast, are you overlaying since you're constrained in terms of how much water will be available? Because I recall seeing a forecast that said you were going to add something like, you're projecting 2 million more people moving into the Bay Area. Their water usage could be somewhere between 4 and 8 times the total capacity of all the Marin water districts, just to support them. So,
but those, of course, are mostly not going into Marin.
Exactly, but which Hetchy Valley are we going to fill the dam so that we can support those populations?
So this isn't really part of our forecast, but there's parallel work going on in a number of venues that is looking at how water needs will be met over the next 30, 40 years. Do you have anything to add on that?
The keynote address at our last General Assembly was a gentleman named Professor Sedlak from Berkeley, who's written a book called Water 2.0 that talks about if you do a certain number of things, and it's a big if, you might be able to provide water in the year 2040. And he lays out specifically the things that need to be done. It was a very interesting discussion. Because of that, we're going to convene a meeting, I believe in the fall, ABAG will, he talks about I think it's called the 5 Taps Conference, where people come together from the region and say, these are the things you would have to do to have water in the future. Are we willing to do them, and how would we do them? But we don't have that information right now. It's a serious problem. I think when Plan Bay Area was adopted in 2013, people were hoping the drought would be over by now. It's not. And so one of the things we're going to do is also be talking to the water districts in the 9 Bay Area counties, because they need to be part of this conversation as well. We're taking it very seriously.
I'm going to add one more thing to this. You remember at the beginning I mentioned that we do the forecast, then we go back really almost as soon as we finish them, and we start again. This is the kind of question that, if it remains an issue 2 years from now, will be part of a reevaluation. And one of the things we're really trying to do now is build up a set of tools that will allow us to do that kind of reevaluation. Actually, I think we have to go with the sticks, so be there and go get your turn.
Thank you. Just to confirm, on each of your slides where you say the source of your data is ABAG from California Department of Finance data, I just want to confirm that we have only one set of population projections this time around, so we're not going to have the disconnect from the different agencies.
That's not exactly what will happen. For one thing, ABAG and DOF come out not entirely in sync in their populations, but what I will confirm for you is that we are talking with DOF on a regular basis, and to the extent that there may be differences, there will be an explanation as to why those differences are there. So for example, if we think Marin will take more people because of this turnover in the housing stock than we think DOF has accounted for, that we could decide to stick with that difference rather than match them.
This is a recommendation. We have over at the University of California, Berkeley, a professor of earth sciences. Her name is Lynn Ingram. And I would highly recommend that you bring her on board any of your thinking about water. She is the world authority on all things concerning water in the Western United States. And her absence from your resource base is, I think, kind of inexcusable. She is really a treasure of information and insight. Hope you bring her on board. Second thing is, we are in southern Marin particularly, and something that I think is often unaddressed, is we face unique geophysical constraints. As like in Sausalito, which is a town built on a cliff, is almost in some respects, with the main thoroughfare built on fill, Highway 101 in its crucial areas, coming down towards Manzanita as you come down from the hill, going through Corte Madera, it's all based on fill. And we have, if you look, and actually were to measure the distance from Highway 101 until you're up in nearly vertical build areas, you're talking about only at best a mile in southern Marin. And in regards to that, we're basically built out. And these are physical factors. Now we can continue to pretend that Marin County is physically like other places. And this is further reinforced by, again, the dominance of the park system. We have almost no buildable area. It's almost all been given over to open space. And I hope that when you're over there, you start putting that into the equation. This is not San Leandro. It's never going to be San Jose. We're a very geophysically limited and unique situation. And I hope these are included in your deliberations.
So if these kinds of constraints are in the general plans and in the zoning ordinances, they should be included. But I'll be sure to take a look at that too.
Thank you. I'm wondering about the migration of commuters in the region and how that impacts your forecasting, because now, and this doesn't have anything to do with growth of people being born or moving from other parts of the country, but people now are commuting into Marin County from Sonoma County, Napa, Solano, or they're commuting from Marin into San Francisco for jobs. Does that impact any of your work in your forecasting and deciding number of units needed?
So, in terms of the actual trips, those are forecast by the NTC model based on the information that we provide on jobs, housing, and population by age in each of the jurisdictions. Does that answer your question, or do you have, or not really? So in that sense, it's, you know, our work is taken into account in the transportation. Are the transportation effects taken into account in what we do? We're required, we have part of the planning for housing that we're doing is to make sure that we don't increase commuting from outside the region. Commuting between counties is a different issue. And that's, I guess I'm going to end up with saying that's a good question. I want to think about that some more.
Well, I'd like to just add on to that, and that was actually part of my question. I was just curious as to why you would have omitted the impact of commuting on employment, particularly in Marin County, where you have people going to the East Bay, going to points north, but primarily going into San Francisco every day. Because it seems to me like in terms of overall health of the county's economy, that's the commuters are very important. And I just would have liked to see maybe a slide about what percentage of the working population actually works where.
So we can get into some of that with vital signs actually afterwards. And let me add to this, now that I've had a little time to think about it, this question and to hear your question. We certainly look at, our modeling effort takes into account housing prices, the age of people living in different parts of the region, and in that sense, and does take into account movements between larger segments of the region. So that happens in our overall regional forecast. Within the geographic distribution, we certainly take into account where the affordable housing is as compared to where the jobs are. And so that also affects where growth occurs. And then that, in turn, is translated into transportation.
Hi. I have a question. Well, in the world of statistics and economics, they say garbage in, garbage out.
Never heard that.
And, one of the things, I want to get back to the city of Fairfax. That's an anomaly. You're aware of the anomaly, I know. But every single person in this room knows, I'm assuming, knows the city of Fairfax. And it has bars, coffee shops, and consignment shops. And that's about it. There is really no economic base there other than just small retail. The fact that you have that anomaly is a huge red flag. I just wonder what kind of data you're using to create these models and how such an anomaly appeared. Maybe it was a rounding error or it was just thrown into a category, but we're going to come back to this. If the projections are wrong, we're going to want to know some answers there. So I guess it's more of a comment than a question.
Right. So no, but you're giving me the opportunity to bring up a couple of points. So I appreciate that question. One thing is that as we go through this process, our preliminary projections will be available to the cities, and we will count on their looking at it and saying, wait a minute, that doesn't look right for us. I think if you remember that early slide that showed what happened, there's 4 bubbles in that part of the diagram that shows how the geographic distribution takes place, and there's public review, and there are the local jurisdictions in that. So that's really important, and one of the reasons we're putting up the old ones here is to get that feedback. In terms of how it could have happened the first time, could be an error. It could be that the city of Fairfield has in its general plan and zoning the ability to add those things, and that's why it happened. And if that's the reason, and we come up with those numbers, and the city says, great, then it may stay there. And again, it's not, when you think about the county as a whole, we're not talking about either a lot of jobs or a lot of housing units. There we have someone over here and here.
Hi, thank you again for the presentation. My question is on the modeling, is there a way to place the amount of education in the Bay Area? I worked in Richmond and Oakland, and those areas need help. They are slated for big development. There also should be slated for a lot of the federal and state funding. So if education were put in there, there's a big need for free schools. There's a big need to train people. I think education and the amount and where it's lacking and the need is one important area. The other area is aesthetics. I worked in Yosemite Park and they limited their commercialism. And a lot of this is based on commercialism, and I don't see too many people here from the chamber. And I think the tax base of the cities has to be put into the areas. Now, because Novato has a lower tax base, we don't have enough money for our schools. We don't have enough money for our buses, our roads, our transportation. And in order to get that, is there a way to model that here's the constraints? We don't need a big bus station. We don't need wind cups, 8 wind cups here, because of the relationship to the education. And the third thing is, I wonder if the gender should be put in, because I have a feeling there's going to be more and more, again, older women. So, for what it's worth.
The gender we could probably do out of what we're working on now. I don't think it's ever been reported before, but that's an interesting suggestion. On education and on tax base, I would say this kind of exercise that we're going through, and particularly if we do it in partnership with the cities giving us feedback if we're not hitting them quite right, should be really valuable for then doing your education plan, competing for education dollars and so forth. I mean, there is the capability of getting detail on how many young people you'll have, the distribution of income and ethnicity within the region or within a jurisdiction. So those things I think would be helpful for the city in their own plan for education. In terms of tax base, similarly, looking at what retail growth might be would help to inform the local area on future revenues. Looking at how housing turns over could also help inform the local government on future revenues. None of what we do directly gives information on that. We're having a hard enough time getting this right.
Okay. Good morning, I'm Hutch Turner. I have a very simple question, and that is, you see using regional transit planning funds as a device to allocate and drive growth in certain cities.
So MTC distributes that money. MTC certainly will take into account these forecasts of growth in deciding where that money is most needed. But I probably shouldn't have even said that, because this is really their area. Do you have anything to add on that?
Just that the meeting is coming on the 28th. There'll be boards that I've seen at the previous open houses that show the whole list, Bay Area wide, of where they currently plan to spend that money, and then they're asking for suggestions. So I think, and I'll ask again if I'm answering a question, but I think what a previous question was talking about is I have to drive from Marin to Oakland to the ABAG offices every day. So my commute's not too bad until I hit 80, then it's a nightmare. But I see the cars backed up coming into Marin. It's a parking lot in Richmond trying to get on the bridge. So the question then is, will there be money to fix that if the growth projections in Marin are lower than other places? Is that what you're asking?
No.
Okay.
Precisely, no. We have.
Microphone.
That's right, I'm allowed.
Speak up, but
The answer, to put it delicately, is no. We have I asked the question because right now in this city, we have an idiotic situation going on, which involves our local bus terminal down, which has declining ridership, which is documented. We are now in the process of approving a $3 million transit hub with a declining ridership, and the sole driver for that is regional transportation, directives or whatever. It's an absurd situation. There's an absolutely perfect situation where top-down planning is driving something that's unwanted and unneeded. If you take that particular situation, isolate it, you will see that it's totally absurd economically. Now, understand economics is a miserable science. This is beyond the pale. And, I have lived in Sausalito. I've lived in many places in Marin County. And I will say this county does not fit well with the rest of ABAG, period. We are a very unique situation. We are too white. We are criticized because we have money. But I am a capitalist, unabashedly. And the reason this county is the way that it is there's been successful people who worked very hard, saved their money, and I have been a renter, and I've not been able to buy a house, but this county is a stark evidence of success of the economic system we have. What's going on now, and I feel badly for you in a way, is because where I would think of elasticity and some other things in the market, you're basically dealing in a directed economy. And a great number of us who own businesses, small businesses, and a lot of tradespeople who work very hard with their fingers and have bad backs, and now have a house here, we are looking at this being taken away. And not in the sense that it's being removed from us, but these houses represent the largest economic item that we have. And every time, through one other device or another, you change dramatically the situation, you affect that value. And I look around this room here, and I see fully half this room is what you and I would call rent seekers. All right? They want a government policy that will give them an advantage. The rest of us are watching it with concern. And your estimates are brutal evidence of the difficulty, and I'm not saying incompetence, mind you, but the difficulty of modeling economic growth, particularly when you're trying to take into account the revenue portion of that growth. The consumptive portion for the people that are net consumers of tax dollars, fairly predictable. But the revenue portion is extraordinarily difficult. It is very volatile. And from my perspective, right now, we have the bridge to nowhere, a block from here, $3 million. $3 million. And for a declining ridership. That's beyond me.
Well, I would just recommend that this is something to take up with your CMA.
You might want to say with the CMA.
With your county transportation management agency. And PAC can take that.
Thank you. A comment about Fairfax, where I live, and I also happen to be on the Chamber of Commerce. Because of the complexion and profile of our town, we have a lot of families. And a lot of our growth, I will check, but I believe it's related to schools, teacher aides, and other services. But my question to you is, in your employment figures, is there a way to factor in self-employment? That is also one of the large percentages of work and employment in our town.
So self-employment is factored in. One of the challenges we face in this next forecast is are we seeing a long-term sea change in that? Or is the recent shift we've seen in that more economy-based, more cyclically based? But it is counted in the job numbers.
Thank you very much. 2 quick points. One is to Clayton's point about the geographic limitations. That goes to the gentleman who just spoke. We do not live in a capitalist county. We live in a highly controlled, zoned, restrictive, preferentially zoned county, where we have hundreds of acres dedicated to unsustainable single-family homes and virtually none available for multifamily development, which means that the fastest growing segment, which is, as we talked about, services and retail, are the fastest growing areas of our employment sector, but the least available housing is affordable, and that's becoming rapidly declining with the increase in rents and that side of the capitalist economy. So what I'm hoping is that you will account for the intra, and just, I'm sorry, I'm slipping on your name. Brad was talking about people come in like in the droves to Marin in the morning because that's where the jobs are and that's where they cannot live. People leave for white-collar jobs, and we suffer because of that lack of diversity and community. So I hope that you do model the traffic generations that are generated by the lack of adequate housing and adequate zoning in Marin.
So I certainly think the intent of doing the transportation modeling is to include those flows, but not being personally involved in the development of that side of the model. I can't tell you the details of how that's done. I do know that it's built on the census. The census has a special analysis of commute flows, and that it's built from that.
I have a context question, and that is, could you just tell us in terms of the forecast agency that you're working with, how many people are in the agency doing the forecasting, and what's your budget, and where does the money come from for that? As well as for overall ABAG. How big is ABAG? How much money? And where is the money coming from for ABAG operations?
I think ABAG's $25 million a year right now, is that right?
Approximately.
And it's grant money.
So I'll answer the first now, and I'll hand it over to you. There are 4 of us at ABAG that are in the research group who work on the forecast. There are 2 people at MTC who we work closely with on the distribution of the forecast, and then there's a number that's unknown to me of people at MTC that work specifically on the transportation forecast or on their overall analytic work.
And on ABAG in general, there's a sort of large staff that works on planning and research, around 20 people. There's what we call enterprise programs, and one of them is PLAN, which helps a number of communities in the Bay Area with their insurance, with risk insurance, insurance for their cities. They have a separate staff, they have a separate budget. There's also Marin, which is a fairly new group within ABAG that helps distribute grants that they get from the state and federal sources to homeowners and multifamily building owners to do energy assessments and energy saving programs. And so we call those the enterprise units, and then we have the admin staff. All of that is on our website, very detailed budget. It's called the Budget and Work Plan. It just got approved, so if you go on the ABAG website and look under About ABAG, you'll see the most recent budget and work plan that has it in tremendous detail, which each of the divisions, what their budget is, what the components of that budget are. And we just posted that last week. It was just approved by the General Assembly.
Primary source of income, or is it that?
The primary source of income is, much of it is grants. We have a resilience program that's fairly new. And that program gets about $3 million a year from groups like FEMA, the state, the Strategic Growth Council and others to study, but a lot of that money is re-granted to local communities. There's a program called the San Francisco Estuary Partnership. They also get millions of dollars in grants each year that they then redistribute to local communities or use to build a bay trail. But the detail, the sources and uses of all of our money is on the website in great detail. I can't do it justice in a short amount of time, but you can get every single piece of the budget and where it comes from, where it goes on the website on abag.com.
Well, please join me in thanking Cynthia for an outstanding presentation. She has a great ability to demystify all of this and has been doing a great job. And I did want to just capsulize that ABAG gets membership dues from each city and the county, and then most of their funding does come from state and federal grants, and highly encourage you to take a look at their website. Introducing also Doug Kelly, who's going to be moderating this section on goals, performance targets, and vital signs, which is one of my babies that I like to play around with. Doug was actually elected to the San Anselmo Town Council in 2013, and he is currently serving as vice mayor. He is no stranger to San Anselmo. He actually served on the Parks and Recreation Commission and was chair for 3 terms. And he also served on the sign committee in San Anselmo. And he's lived in Marin for 20 years, and 18 of which in San Anselmo. He is vice president and co-owner of a performance POS, which is headquartered in Santa Fe and provides point-of-sale systems, digital security cameras, and business intelligence, and so forth and so on. So please join me in welcoming Doug Kelly.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. I'm glad we're doing these public outreaches. We want to continue to do that. One of the things I did when I got on the San Anselmo Town Council was asked to be the ABAG representative. Many of us who are newly elected have done that. We believe that ABAG over time has lost a little focus on who they work for, which is they work for us, we don't work for them. And we, many of us object to the what was, and it's changing. I think Brad has been a really great breath of fresh air. But the view, whether it's valid or not, about top-down government mandates, many of us feel that engaging the public is the right answer, and we have diverse opinions. We have diverse opinions in this room. So I want to thank everybody for continuing to speak with each other in a courteous manner. We're not all going to agree on the right answers, but we should agree that we're going to work together to increase the ability to afford housing and to also make sure that we can get through our traffic and transportation issues in a way that makes sense. Just as a small example, one of the things I've been advocating for is to get rid of all of the physical toll booths and going to strictly a transformer system for toll taking. Each bridge should be built halfway. In other words, if you go to Golden Gate Bridge north to south, it should be halfway each way. We're gaming the system, and a lot of the traffic we see in Marin are people that may be going across the Richmond Bridge in the morning because it's free, and coming over 37 and down 101 because it's free. There's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of ways, and one of the things that we asked today was to have MTC come. They didn't show up. I think it would be better if they did show up in these meetings with ABAG, because these issues are issues that we need to work on together as a community of diverse opinion, but also as a group of diverse organizations. So I want to introduce Brad Paul, who's going to talk about our targets, and I also want to say that he's been great to work with. Thanks.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. You have in your packets or among the handouts 2 things. One says goals and targets for Plan Bay Area, which is from the last version. And it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 general categories. And then you also have Summary of performance. These are performance targets that go with those. There's more than 7, but several categories have more than one target. And this is on both sides. You'll see if you, on your way out, there's a big 3-part panel out there that talks about what we're going to do in terms of looking at these goals and targets for the next round of Plan Bay Area. And there are these little red dots that you can place. You can take 3 of them and put them on your top 3 priorities. If you go over onto the back of this sheet, the one that's blue on this side, it actually tells you how other counties have voted at these open houses. And it just takes the 7 areas and people, they added up all the votes, all the dots, and came up first, second, and third place. And I thought it was interesting, I was just looking at it. Marin will be the one on the 28th and we'll add those numbers in at that point. But for some of the North Bay counties in particular, it's interesting to see how they rank things. So in Sonoma County, they ranked, it was a tie for climate protection, and they also ranked open space and agricultural preservation very high. Solano County ranked open space and agricultural preservation number 1. Napa rated it number 2 and had healthy and safe communities as number 1. If you look at things like San Francisco, more urban places, they ranked affordable housing number 1, transportation effectiveness number 2, and equitable access number 3. So you can see that we're getting different responses from different communities and different counties based on their concerns, because they are different. And what we encourage you to do is, and it's not just today, but you can go on our website, the Plan Bay Area website, there's a way to take comments from people directly that way. There are little cards that have that website on them, that look like little business cards on the table here. We encourage you to come to the meeting on the 28th and vote with the little red dots. You can do it today if you want. There's the board out there with the red dots. But it's really important for you here in the community, both local elected officials and citizens, to weigh in on this. And there's a number of ways to do it. This workshop is one opportunity. The one on the 28th is another. And we are willing to come to your meetings. A group of us, Pat, myself, and several of the other ABAG delegates attended a Citizen Marin meeting not too long ago to have this kind of conversation. Several cities in Marin have asked us to come to a city council meeting. We're happy to do that. It'd be hard for us to go to 101 cities and counties to their meetings, but we would be happy when invited to come and have this kind of conversation and get this kind of input. So we encourage you to continue to talk to us about this. Let me just say a couple of things about the goals. 2 of them on this list of 7, the blue page, are actually mandated by state law, by SB 375. And they are climate protection and adequate housing. And so there are very specific targets about reducing greenhouse gas by 18% by 2040 for climate protection. And the plan is supposed to meet the targets and house 100% of the population growth by 2040 as well. Those are locked in. The rest of them are ones that came out of the last process and talking to people throughout the region. They are up for discussion and change, depending on what kind of response we get to that. And again, if there's a goal that's on here or not on here that you think should be on here, there's a place to comment on that as well. So I'm not going to go through all of these one by one, but I'll be happy to answer questions you have. I think it's important to see this as the beginning of a very long process. There are a set of workshops, the last one, the last official one with MTC and ABAG is on the 28th, to look at, these are the open houses, to look at what's, basically have this conversation again, where here's where we are in the process, here's what's involved in the process, and here's how you can become involved and have input. That will be the last one. We will have another set of these workshops next year to talk about the 3 scenarios and get public input on those. And in 2017, there'll be another set of workshops, one in each county, to talk about the final plan, the draft EIR that is settled. But that's not the only place to have the kind of input you want. There are many other avenues to do that. We thought about this and about some of the mistakes that were made last time, and we're really trying hard to come back with a whole set of ways that you can get involved. I'll stop now and be happy to take any questions we want. Who has the microphone?
That's my job, I guess. Clayton.
I hate to keep harping on this, I've done on many occasions, but the elephant that's not in the room is Caltrans. Caltrans, I don't know what role they have in all of this, but Caltrans governs what happens with the money that's available for road construction and improvement. And I noticed that what we have here, when you're saying transportation system effectiveness, you have a picture of a car. So I assume that if this is honest advertising, we're talking about actually dealing with all the 90+% of us that survive in this county using our cars. And yet we have this lack of Caltrans. It doesn't show up at any civic meetings hardly ever. And yet they are responsible for the Richmond Bridge, for what's going on north of Novato and that nightmare going north up to Santa Rosa, and also for doing the road improvements down in southern Marin, even just getting some energy going to clean out the drainage culverts down there by Manzanita and Marin City, which led to a traffic jam in December that went all the way up, all the way to the north end of Petaluma. Traffic was stopped for a whole morning. And where is Caltrans? And how do we make Caltrans become a responsible public agency? And this, I think, is one of the biggest issues in this county right now.
So the quick answer to that is they'll be here on the 28th. They will have a table and staff there. So I would urge you to raise the issue with them at the table, but also raise it in all the opportunities you have walking around to talk to other people from other agencies about the need to get them involved.
And additional question, are you guys at ABAG really willing to get and play hardball with Caltrans and really get into a real face-off with them, get them to actually get that Richmond Bridge lane open now?
The answer is I drive that bridge every day, and I keep wondering why that, especially coming in and at night going out, why that third lane isn't here. So I care about that a lot. I have to deal with it every day.
So why don't we take a few more questions, but then I'd like to also have an opportunity to show vital signs, which is an integral part of the performance targets. So I think you had a question.
Thank you. Very educational morning. Thanks a lot. I just would like to comment on your icons on this page. I find I'm somewhat affronted by the fact that the transportation system effectiveness is represented by an automobile. And in terms of meeting all of our other regional goals, we need to be moving to more commuter transit, more public transportation, more opportunities for people to get around without getting into their own single passenger vehicle. And I would really recommend that you find another way to represent that, please.
I will see if we can change that.
Perfect question, actually. Hey, could you go down to Golden Gate Transit? So before we go to the next question, I just wanted Hank to show, this is part of vital signs, and this happens to be transit ridership, and so he is deleted all the other transit operators. It's interesting that Marin Transit isn't in here, but so he's going to take off AC Transit, BART, and Muni. And what's interesting to see is that transit ridership is down overall, not only in the Bay Area, but also in Marin County. So this is a great website. It has a lot of information. We're going to show you a couple of other things too, but that sort of goes to your question.
May I make one comment? Sure. Thank you. Transit in Marin County is not working. I try to use it because I'm an environmentalist and I am unsuccessful much of the time. So no wonder it's down. It's hard to use. It doesn't go where you want to go when you want to get there. And we need to put resources into improving that system, not taking it away because ridership is down.
So when is that? And then you want.
So we're not actually a tag team. We didn't discuss this ahead of time. But that's basically my concern as well, is that, you know, I'm a big promoter of walking and biking, and I'm glad that we have had a lot of money coming in for that. But one of the biggest problems with transit is, and it's really too bad MTC is not here, or Caltrans, is that the way it's set up, you can get transportation money for capital improvements, but you cannot get money for operations. There is a certain set amount that is for operations, and this is why we can't improve our transit systems. One of the reasons, because as Kiki was saying, we don't have frequent enough transit to make it tenable for anybody to use it doing anything but going into San Francisco. If you work in a financial district, you got a great transit system. Other than that, it's hell on wheels to try to get anywhere. And we even voted ourselves a sales tax to improve our transit system, and then Golden Gate Transit increased their what they charged us, and we weren't able to implement this wonderful plan that we had to improve our transit system. So we need operating money. Somewhere in this whole formula, there needs to be an opening for getting transportation money for operations for transit.
The good news is there's some really good advocates for that. Not on my board, but on the MTC board. Scott Wiener, who's a supervisor in San Francisco, made that point over and over again during the last plan mayor, and he's not giving up. Because you have to adequately fund operations before you add capacity or add routes, all of that. So I think there are some people both on the MTC board and our board that get that and are fighting for it.
I just have a quick comment. I went on the website where you have the goals and targets and you're soliciting input, and I thought it was very cool, and I really appreciate having that website. But given the kind of the discussion that had happened last time, it was a bit intimidating. And so what I'd like to suggest is maybe that you, because you have a great style, have a short 3-minute little clip that kind of welcomes everyone to their comments. And then it would also be helpful if you had the list of questions maybe up front, so that when you did click onto the right space, you could kind of know what you were going to be asked and be able to think in advance. But I thought overall the site was pretty easy to use, and I want to give you kudos.
Well, I'm going to I wrote that down because I'm in charge of communications at ABAG, so I'm one of the people that can make those changes. And I think that's actually a good idea. And our website, the ABAG website itself, was changed. The homepage, for those of you who've gone there in the past, it looked like it was built in 1982 and hadn't been improved since 1982, and in fact, that was true. So we changed it. We got together with some consultants in our staff and said, this needs to be user-friendly. Oh, there it is. And MTC is actually going through the same process because their website looks like ours used to, and they're very aware of that. We have to make these websites user-friendly, or people are just going to not use them or give up. But I think the idea of having a human piece to this, having a video where people talk about what you can do, why it's important, would be really helpful. I'll see if we can do that pretty soon.
Question back here.
Yeah, so far we're talking about government solutions. You know, in terms of the public transportation being down, we're asking for more money. There is a solution out there, however, and that is people pay for what they use, and it's, I guess it's a private market. So I'm looking at the summary of performance, number 2, and it says adequate housing. And the goal is to provide 100% of all low, medium, and I guess, is it market rate? I don't have my glasses on. Housing. What portion of that do you anticipate the private market is going to address, or is this all going to be from the government planning, central control?
So that's, again, one of the 2 that was mandated by the state. If I were writing that, I probably wouldn't have written it that way because it's very confusing. It basically says that we have to build housing for everybody in the Bay Area that needs it, from very high end to very low end. And at the low end, which I'm very familiar with, I've been involved in building affordable housing over the years, and the resources to do that are gone for the most part. Redevelopment, and I was a big opponent of redevelopment back in my hometown when they took my grandmother's home and her business and destroyed it without any real compensation. So I get the bad side of redevelopment. But in recent years, in many cities, it was turned into a source of funding for housing and projects that people wanted. When the governor took away redevelopment, in San Francisco, for instance, they used to commit $50 million a year, $40 to $50 million a year to affordable housing. That's gone. So I don't know how we meet those goals without funding. That's a question we have for Sacramento. You took away the major source of funding, when are you going to give something back? And that's something that we're talking about. But that can't do the job. The private market has to do the job, because we can only provide the people that do affordable housing a very important piece of that, but not the whole thing. And that gets back to the conversation we had earlier today, is how do you create a menu of ways to provide affordable housing, market rate housing, moderately priced housing, that works in the private sector. The junior second unit legislation in Novato is one unique way to do that. That alone can't do it. There has to be ways that you can work with local developers to build some of the housing that's needed for the workforce. And that's going to happen on a case-by-case basis, local jurisdiction by local jurisdiction. Government cannot, at above the local level, mandate that, not in any effective way. And I don't think it's going to be helpful if we try. But we need to be there as a resource. Somebody earlier said, what can we do? The big tech companies, as you know, are under a lot of pressure. The Googles, the Twitters, Salesforce, because they brought thousands, tens of thousands of workers into the Bay Area. And they're not building any housing. So finally, slowly, they're talking about building some housing in Silicon Valley and the Google campus, so those people don't have to all move north or south. But there's been talk lately about them investing in funds, housing trust funds. Now, traditionally what happens when that happens is the squeaky wheels get the grease. So San Francisco gets almost all the money, Silicon Valley gets part of it, and maybe Oakland gets a little bit. If we're part of that discussion, we can talk to them about spreading the money around to things that are locally appropriate. So if there are programs in Marin that you want that are underfunded, we can help direct some of that money from the private sector to those programs. So if it's a program to help developmentally disabled residents who are from families in Marin, there may be a way to do that on a small scale and infill project that people in the community support, but there's a missing piece of money. And we can help with some of that funding discussion. So I don't expect the government to be able to do that. I don't think the public sector can do that. We have to engage the private sector in a really constructive way, but it has to be done in a way that's appropriate to each community.
Yeah, so you've been speaking a bit about the adequate housing and the goals. Can you talk about the equity? It seems to me they bleed into each other. You know, this idea of economic access or equitable access, isn't that adequate? Can you elaborate?
I think that what's meant here, and we talk to people in the business community all the time, and it's becoming the real control on this rapid growth in places like Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and the San Jose area is a lack of affordable housing. And that's not just low-income housing, it's housing affordable to their own workforce. If we don't figure out a way to solve that problem, the commutes get longer, prices continue to go up, and companies will leave. The employers will leave to places. I mean, I was just back visiting my family in Massachusetts. I grew up in Fall River, Massachusetts, my mom's 90th birthday. A house that in San Francisco costs $2 or $3 million, in Fall River is $200,000 to $300,000. And over time, people are going to start making decisions to go home. People like me that are, and not just people that are working, but people that have companies, and are going to stop wanting to beat their head against the wall and just move out. So one of the top priorities for the companies that are the engines of the region are, they've got to figure out a way to solve this problem. And most of it will happen in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, Oakland, and the 15 largest cities. But I don't want Marin and Sonoma and Napa to be forgotten in that discussion. Those of you who know Supervisor Mark Luce in Napa has a program called Work Proximity Housing, where the county makes down payments available to working families that can't afford to buy the entry-level homes in their community. That's a very appropriate program for Napa. It may be for Marin as well, but there needs to be some money to prime those kinds of programs. And so I think part of the equity is how do we help the communities that want to have more opportunities at every level of the economic ladder to be able to live in those communities and thrive in those communities. And it's up to the local governments and the people in those communities to decide what those programs are. Once they do, it's up to us to help find the resources to do that.
Another question?
In the table on the relative priorities assigned to the various components of the Bay Area Plan, of the 7, I noticed Marin isn't even mentioned here. Anyway, 7 of the 8 counties that have been polled, climate protection is only mentioned in one of them. But at the same time, on your summary of performance, in the next 25 years, it's stated that the plan projects CO2 emissions per capita declining by 18%. Now, since we have so little support for climate protection on one hand, there seems to be a disconnect on what you project will happen in the real world in the next 25 years.
So the quick answer to that again is that's the other one of the two goals that was not up to local community or the Bay Area to adopt. That was part of the legislation that created SB 375 that created Plan Bay Area. So that's one of the two that's locked in that in the housing law. I think you're correct. It's interesting that of the people that came here, they didn't rank that number 1 or 2 or 3 except for Sonoma County. So this is an interesting snapshot of the people that went, and there's a list above that of each of the previous open houses. And we will plug the numbers in on the 28th after we have the meeting in Marin, so the Marin numbers there soon. But you will see there that the number of people that attended went from 90 in Alameda and 85 in San Francisco to 30 in Solano and 35 in Napa. So this is a snapshot of what that group of people thought were priorities. That's why it's so important for people to go, as the woman over here talked about, to the website and vote. We need more people voting on this to get a better sense of how people in the region feel. And you should just let your neighbors know, you yourself should go there and tell your organizations to go on the website and vote so we can get the most accurate snapshot we can. But that GHG reduction is one of the two that was locked in the legislation. It's an important goal. And at ABAG, we talk more and more. We hear more and more people say, what are we doing about resiliency? How do we make the Bay Area more resilient, not just to sea level rise and the questions about global climate change, but earthquakes, flooding, like the flood that stopped Highway 101 at Manzanita the other day. That's happening now. We don't have to wait for a while. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at. But I'd actually be interested to know why people didn't rate that higher.
Another question?
Can I just make one quick point? The CO2 emission reduction goals should be met because of the increased use of electric cars and better gas mileage. We're going to see those goals met. They're on target to be met as we speak.
Okay, another question back here.
Yes, I'm looking at the key milestones chart, and it talks about scenario, and I'm having trouble understanding what that really means. What is the scenario? There's going to be 3 chosen, and then of the 3, 1 will be chosen, and I have trouble just picturing what that really means. So I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on that.
I think I'm going to let Cynthia answer that. I mean, I'll just say briefly that last time around there were 3 different ways the Bay Area could develop in the future. Sort of 3 different development patterns were included, and they were analyzed for what kind of impacts they'd have. But I'm going to let Cynthia talk about that in a little more detail.
Actually, Brad, you gave my exact answer. And that's basically what they are. The scenarios all have to do with the distribution geographically throughout the region rather than different levels of growth region.
You have another question here for Brad?
Yeah, I talked a little bit with you about this during the break, but between Cynthia's projections of why population is going to change in Marin County, meaning that we've got an older population, those people will pass away, we'll have new families come in, we'll have growth in that regard. Besides that, there is the obligation to meet future housing needs, and it seems like there's this pointing going on between ABAG, where on the one hand, ABAG says, here's the population growth we expect, and then on the other hand, ABAG is saying, and here's what each of your communities needs to build, and that increases the population. And so it's not purely that you're seeing that the population in Marin County is going to change due to the fact that our demographics are changing. It's also due to the mandated housing that we're having to meet. And it seems as though, I think for many of us, it feels like the expectation and mandate is the population has to grow in Marin. There's no end that we see in sight, even though, what has been is somewhat flat growth. And so I guess I'd like you to speak to that and explain why there seems to be this this cyclical thing going on with ABAG's projections and its mandate?
So I think that's an interesting question because that might change given what Cynthia said today, and I'm going to let her speak to this in a second. But the big number for the Bay Area comes from HCD. They say the Bay Area needs to create this many units. Then our staff looks at a number of ways to distribute that, comes up with a tentative number, sends it out to all those communities and says, there's something we missed here, is there some data we don't have, or did we not understand some of your local controls? Those communities come back and say, we'd like to have the number adjusted. In many cases, they are adjusted. In some cases, they're not. And that becomes the RENA number for 8 years. That got locked in at the same time as Plan Bay Area in 2013, so it doesn't come up again till 8 years after that. In Marin, what I heard Cynthia saying is that just through natural changes in the population, there's both population and the number of households you need to house that population. And so if we see a trend of more and more people either moving out, of single people living in single families moving out and being replaced by families, and that trend continues over a period of time, that impacts how much new housing you need to house families. Now granted, that's going to be at a certain income level because other people can't afford those single family homes right now. But I think that's what we're here to talk about is are there adjustments we're going to make as we see different patterns in Marin, in San Francisco, in Oakland. And what my understanding in the last round for Plan Bay Area, because there is so much new housing projected in San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, and the 15 largest cities, the RENA numbers in the last cycle, which just ended in 2013, were about half of what they were the cycle before that in Marin for each city and community. So we'll have to wait because we've got a few more years to go, but that trend may continue. We don't know, I don't think at this point, what the projections are going to look like next time, because it's a regional number we get, and it's really about how you distribute that number. And Cynthia, do you want to add anything to that, or?
There's not too much to add, and I don't know if you would have anything to add on RENA, Hank, since you went through it, but I guess the other thing to keep in mind that there's the projection of the workforce as well, and there is the issue of the amount of commuting of the lower wage workforce into Marin. So it's possible that HCD would decide that that should be one of the criteria that determines how much housing comes in here. Whereas our analysis, apart from that, might say you can accommodate this amount of growth just with the housing you have. So I can't promise you won't get new housing allocations, but that's a long time in the future and not part of this round. Do you want to add anything on that? Okay.
Okay, we have another question back here.
Well, first of all, it is so heartening to be able to be in this kind of audience, Brad, with your comments and your thoughtful participation with us, and Pat for you organizing, and Cynthia for your comments. I've got a comment and a question, I guess. On the second target about affordable housing, back in the 2013 plan, that was one of the items that showed that the strategy for meeting affordable housing targets through Plan Bay Area missed its mark. So I have a question about what's happening now between the 2013 plan and the 2017 plan that target might be met. And my other comment is around on the milestones, the public participation plan. Many of us in the room are veterans of that earlier Plan Bay Area working up to 2013 and participated in many ways with participation. Many of us have also looked at the public participation plan and see that it's a pretty closed system, that it looked like what was, and not reflecting what's happening in this meeting. This is outstanding to have the dialogue, but the public participation plan looks like it's measuring effectiveness by saying how many meetings were held, and how many press releases were sent, and how many people visited the website. So there's a certain lacking substance in terms of feeling like there'd be real exchange and consideration of what thoughtful people, like people in this room, are bringing forward about questions and concerns. So just wondering if you can comment then too about the public participation plan and how we keep getting substance in public participation.
I'm going to add to the list of things you gave, which is what I heard is that often people would take the time to come to a meeting or write a letter sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5-page letter. And it went in, and all they saw in the EIR comments responses was, we got your letter and we disagree with it. Or we got your letter and we noted it.
Right.
And that was one of the major criticisms last time around. So this time around, if you submit a question, and this happened in all the open houses so far, it will happen again on the 28th, we commit to people, if we try to answer it at the meeting, and there are all these tables for different topics, and I'll be there, other people will be there, we'll have MTC there to answer the transportation questions. But if we can't answer a question, which happens, you write it down and we guarantee to answer it in 5 working days on the Plan Bay Area website. And I've been watching those questions, because what happens is MTC, even if it's a transportation question, sends it to us to see if we have some insight into it. And when we answer a question, we send it to MTC. So there was some criticism last time around about there not being enough coordination between the 2 agencies. And it was partly because we've never done something like this before. MTC does something called a regional transportation plan every 4 years. This got to be a part of that process. If they had this many people show up at every single hearing they had on the RTP, that would be unusual. They didn't anticipate, and I think people at ABAG under-anticipated the kind of reaction you would get when you add land use and housing to that discussion. Because, as I explain to people all the time, I don't have much faith in being able to affect federal legislation or change. I don't even have a lot of faith in what I can do as an individual at the state level. But when somebody starts talking about my neighborhood and my city and changing the way that looks and feels, I get involved. And I get pretty mad if I haven't been told about it in advance. So what we want to do this time around is do it differently. And when people ask a good question, they deserve a good answer. And on top of that, we're going to take all the comments and questions we hear in all of these open houses, summarize them, and present them in, I think it's the June 12th joint meeting of the ABAG Admin Committee and the MTC Planning Committee. And staff is going to present that so people hear early on what people's concerns are. So I don't think, in the end, everybody may not agree that this process this time around is perfect, but I sure hope that people say it was a lot better than last time.
And one of the things that I'm committing to is to making sure that all the comments and the questions from this forum actually gets into that website and into MTC and ABAG as part of the formal comment period.
But you had one of the questions I just want to answer quickly about the housing goals, that they weren't met. I mean, these are honest evaluations, and the fact is that we didn't build enough housing since the plan was passed. That's not going to change, especially at the lower levels of housing costs, not just low income, but middle income working families, unless we figure out a way to get more resources to help with that. The work proximity housing program that is going on now is one small way to address that, but we need to come up with more. And we need to work with the private sector to help them figure out a way to do this as well.
Okay, we have 4 more questions, and time is fast moving here.
Thank you. Going back to the climate protection scores in your previous meetings and the fact that only Sonoma voted that that was the #1 importance or of any importance, I'd like to just frame that from the standpoint that Plan Bay Area came out of SB 375 and the Sustainable Community Strategy, and SB 375 came out of AB 32, which is California's landmark climate change action law. Some people say misguided. And so, as an environmentalist and a sustainability advocate in this county for a long time, we have asked our elected officials to view every decision and every policy through the lens of climate change. And I wonder if, considering the genesis and the parentage of this effort, that we might elevate the concept of climate protection to be an overarching umbrella concept from which stem all of these actions and implementations which should address that.
I think, first of all, let me just say that our director, my boss, has a report. One of his main interests in life is climate change, sea level rise, and resilience. And it's not about 20, 30 years from now. It's if there's a flood, if there's a king tide, and I saw this once in Mill Valley with my son, where there was a king tide and 3 days of rain. and there's a bridge, it's near that restaurant over off that the bridge, the water was this far from the top of the bridge. If the water had gotten to the top of the bridge, it would have flooded out the whole neighborhood. And my son and I came back an hour and a half later. The good news is it was here, it was there. It stopped Preston. But when I asked people why, they said because the king tide was coming in as all this water was trying to get out from the rain. That could happen at any time. We need to start thinking about that. But that's a good sort of beginning to thinking about what happens when sea level just starts coming up. Whether it's in 20 years or 30 years, it will happen at some point. And so I think we take that very seriously. One of the questions that came up, you may remember last time around, was people got up in these meetings and said, why is there nothing in Planned Bay Area about sea level rise? Why is there nothing in Planned Bay Area about the lack of a long-term water supply to deal with this growth? And the answer was, we'll put it in the next plan. We may not have the answer, but we'll begin to deal with it. So it might be, in some of these cases, and I'll use the example of the water system, we're not going to have an answer for the 2017 plan. We're going to go a long way toward that with the conference we're having in the fall, beginning to understand what's at stake and what needs to happen. And it may be that it'll be the next one after that, 4 years later, there's a concrete regional plan to actually deal with the water needs of the region. But we can only do so much in each one of these updates, so we are focusing on the issues of climate, the issues of resilience in terms of how do you protect all the communities in the Bay Area from flooding, earthquakes. If you have a major earthquake and it knocks out, we just did a study the other day that there are, I think, 4 major oil refineries in the Bay Area. There's a single pumping station, and it's on a just recently recognized fault. So if that earthquake hits there, then the oil supplies in the whole region are out for a long time. Now, knowing that, we might want to start doing something now to see if there's a way to protect that. If the airports survive an earthquake, but the pipelines that send fuel to them are out, so you can't get fuel for the planes, and the roads are underwater, you need to know that now. That's the value of doing that. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at to deal with some of those issues. And we're doing it with BCDC, MTC.
There's a couple of bridges that I don't know how long you've lived in San Anselmo, but there's a couple of bridges in San Anselmo and Ross where it didn't go down. It went up, and it happens regularly. That's not my question. Just to elaborate on what Elizabeth said, there's a certain amount that if you build it, they will come. We don't particularly like the wind cup project, and if it's not economically sustainable, they'll go bankrupt and lower the rent, and people will come. So there is a chicken and egg aspect to what all the housing requirements have that has an effect, and I don't know how you, as an economist, take that into account. If you say we have to build, 10,000 housing units in Marin, they'll fill up because of the economic issues. So somehow they will fill up, and then you'll say, see, our projection was right. Which is the chicken and which is the egg? And I think that's just something you have to look at.
That's a comment.
A couple of quick comments. Your excellent suggestion, Brad Paul, for senior housing, assisted living, for older people to stay in the towns, the villages they've been in for many years would be an excellent addition, rather than just straight affordable housing. A lot of small towns in Marin have service people coming into them every day. Traffic gets backed up hugely, and they don't work just in that town, they work in all the towns in Marin. So what are you going to, you can't provide affordable housing in a one town for a mobile population like that. And the other thing that I'd love to have stated is that your greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gases are less than 5% CO2. The other part is water vapor. Hope you have fun regulating that. The MTC plan is based on that, which is, as our other commenter said, it came from AB 32 and 375. If you've been keeping up with the science lately, there is no indication that CO2 is causing global warming, which morphed into climate change. There has been none for 18 years, and so it's time to revisit the science and get this straight and stop basing policies on things that aren't happening. Thank you.
Did you have a comment?
I'm Judy Binsaka, and I chair the Transportation Land Use Housing Committee of the League of Women Voters of Marin County. The League supports good public process. So thanks go to Pat for convening this group to share information and provide feedback on the ABAG process, and to the members of the ABAG staff here today on a Saturday to get feedback on past and current ABAG procedures. The League supports good regional planning efforts that concentrate building where it belongs, not on agricultural and environmentally sensitive lands, and that strives to protect and improve air quality. The League supports building housing, and that of course includes affordable housing that meets the needs of Marin County and its cities and towns. And that's where local responsibility, as Pat and others have mentioned, comes in. The League strongly encourages the practice of local responsibility in Marin. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 more comments, questions, and then I'll have to wrap things up.
Yeah, I want to also thank Pat for organizing this meeting, and all of you from ABAG who did come, and all of our elected representatives. Thank you for doing this. I have a heart. It seems as though Plan Bay Area, a lot of people seem to think that the purpose of Plan Bay Area is to drive growth. And I really want to reframe that, because the purpose of Plan Bay Area is to meet needs. And what our good people at ABAG are trying to do is assess what those needs are so that we can plan for them and address them in a way that actually solves problems without creating new problems. And that's a difficult thing to do. We want to preserve our communities, and our communities are not just our physical communities, it is the people that makes up those communities, and we're losing a lot of the people that make up our community. The jobs, as we can see, that are being created in Marin are mostly service sector or retail low-paying jobs, and if we don't have housing that those people can afford, then they will be coming from somewhere else and driving traffic, not just on the Richmond Bridge, but on our surface roads. So the purpose, as I see it, Plan Bay Area, is trying to locate the jobs and the housing in such a way that people have a choice whether they want to drive or not. Right now, most of us don't have that choice. We have to drive. It's the way our communities are set up. So if we're going to meet needs in the future, let's at least meet those needs in a way that A, protects our open space and our agricultural land, not just in Marin, but what surrounds us, because they're building way out in the Central Valley for people who work here. We want to preserve that open space, and we want to see that take place in such a way that it's near transit, it's near the jobs, it's near shops and services, so we can reduce the number of trips that our people are making by car. There are consequences to not planning and not doing anything, and it is much better to plan for the future than to just let the private sector just decide everything for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last question, comment is from Andrew, and then I'm going to wrap things up.
Target number 4 on your sheet here. Target number 4 on your sheet here says to reduce by 50% the number of injuries and fatalities from all collisions, including bike and pedestrian. If that is the goal to be accomplished over 8 years, I cannot see that it is remotely possible or even a reasonable expectation. Is this some sort of statement about making safety a priority and not having a goal that's reachable? Or have I misunderstood the whole thing?
No, this is often, I get questions about this goal. This was put in because there are a lot of people who are concerned, as you would read in the papers, about the number of pedestrian and bicycle fatalities. So I think you're right, it was a way to try to focus the region's attention on the need to fix this problem. And I think we're making some progress in some cities. I'm not sure we're tracking this everywhere. But this is the kind of thing that, going forward for the next plan, the MTC Commission and our board will look at it and say, do we need to leave this in, take it out, or change it? So this is the kind of discussion we're going to be going through. So if you have any strong feelings about this or any other one of these, let us know. That'll help us make that decision. I just want to thank you all for coming today.
Please let's thank Doug and Brad for the great discussion about goals, performance targets, and then you just saw a little bit about vital signs. Highly encourage you go to their website. It's vitalsigns.mtc.ca.gov. I think I've learned all the different ins and the outs of it, but I really would challenge all of you to really get to know it. There's a lot of information on that website, and you could just see a little bit in terms of who's commuting, where they're commuting to and from, just by putting your mouse over it. And there's lots of other information in other areas. First, I wanted to thank all of you for coming. This is the first public workshop on Planned Bay Area and the 9-county Bay Area. And there are open houses being conducted throughout the 9-county Bay Area, one in each county. And Marin County is having theirs on May 28th at the Civic Center from 5 to 7 in the cafeteria. Highly encourage you to go, voice your opinion, and then also get your neighbor and friends to go as well. Be sure before you leave to fill out the yellow evaluation forms. Those are tailored for this workshop. I really would love to hear what you have to say about this workshop. And if you would like to see more workshops like this where there's more of a dialogue, please make that comment noted. I want to make sure that you take a look at the displays out in the back. And I wanted to first thank all of the elected officials for coming: Mary Beth, Damon, Stephanie, Linda, Elizabeth, Kevin, Doug. I think I got everybody there, and myself, of course. I just want to thank you. And Ray, our timekeeper at Sausalito. These people, they're the ABAG delegates and alternates, and I have to tell you, they're just a wonderful group of people. We have a very good, solid group of ABAG delegates in each of the cities in Marin County, and we work really well together, and it's kind of fun to see it. So I want to thank you all very much for participating on it, and the subcommittee, which included Damon, Doug, and Kevin and myself, for the finalizing the agenda and the format and everything. Lastly, I think I really want to wholeheartedly thank Brad Paul, Cynthia Kroll, and Hing Wong for giving up part of their Saturday and coming and talking here and being open for this public workshop format. Let's give them a round of applause.